So after I decided that I'm not really a writer, now don't get me wrong, I still write, I still have blog posts, not real often and not lengthy, because I think that's still important, that you still want to have a voice in the written form. But for me, I'm very comfortable in front of the camera. I love to speak. I love to use my voice, and so I naturally gravitated to podcasting. Now, I'm a therapist, and so my industry, there's not many people who are therapists that are doing podcasts. In fact, there's not many people in my industry that's doing anything online. And that's a shame, because we have such a great message that we want to help people. And I think a part of that is they don't know how. Therapists don't know how. A vast majority of the therapists don't know how to market themselves in the right way. They're still stuck in that old school way of marketing. And so I thought, I need to break the mold. I want to try to reach the masses. I have no idea what it's going to be like, but then I transitioned into podcasting. And so I learned from people like Pat Flynn. I learned from people like Cliff Ravenscraft, the podcast Answer Man. I learned from John Lee Dumas. I learned from Chris Ducker on podcasting. And so for me, if I am interested in doing something, I'm going to be a good student. So I dove into research. How do you do this? How do you put a podcast up? And so when I started my podcast, I didn't know what my audience was. I had actually had an audience of 0. Nobody knew who I was. And that's okay, because that's where we all start. Everybody starts with 0 audience, and that's okay. And so I started my podcast, I learned how to do it, and then I quickly realized in the first week of my podcast, I now had an audience, a global audience that really kind of blew my mind. And I really opened my eyes, if you will, of the potential of using my voice to reach the masses. Now, you may not be into podcasting, and that's okay. But for me, I'm not as much of a writer. I'm much more comfortable talking and speaking. And then after I was doing my podcast after a while, then I discovered video. I discovered an app called Periscope, and that is my jam, if you will. I love Periscope. It's a one-way live streaming where you get in front of the camera and talk to people all over the world, and they can talk to you via little comments in the screen that kind of floats up the screen. That changed my world, if you will. And then I started out with being a therapist, but then I became known as the calm expert. And Periscope actually helped me develop my personal brand. I love helping people with anxiety and stress and anger and fear. And everything that I talked about on my podcast had something to do with keeping calm. And then when I launched my Periscope, I quickly grew my audience, and then my audience got to know me as the calm expert. And so people who come watch me because I help them learn at least one tip on how to keep calm. And so I love Periscope, and I love my podcast. So here I am I found what I'm into, my audio with my podcast and video with Periscope.